What if I told you that Meghan Markle's obsession with power and titles wasn't born the day she shook hands with Prince Harry, but that the seed had been planted long before, when she was still living in Hollywood, married to Trevor Engelson, dreaming of a throne she hadn't yet found? Doesn't that question already make you lean in, wondering what Trevor saw that the rest of the world missed? That's exactly where we begin. Because if you strip away the polished interviews, the carefully curated photos, and the glamorous facade, you're left with a story that starts not in castles, but in Los Angeles. Trevor Engelson, a name that doesn't ring with royal weight, but one that once stood at the very center of Meghan Markle's world. Hollywood producer, businessman, a man who had carved his way into the entertainment industry through grit rather than inheritance. He wasn't royalty, but he held something Meghan valued in her early years: access. Access to Hollywood circles, access to opportunities, access to a life that was just beyond her reach. For Meghan, Trevor was more than a husband. He was a doorway. And when you begin to see him in that light, her story suddenly takes on a chilling new meaning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. Meghan Markle was not born into royalty. She was not born into extreme wealth. Instead, she was born into the gritty world of Los Angeles, a place where dreams are crafted, crushed, and recycled every day. Her father worked in television production. Her mother had connections to social work and wellness. Meghan grew up straddling two worlds, one that showed her the glamour of television sets, and the other that kept her grounded in reality. But the truth? Even as a teenager, Meghan's eyes weren't fixed on stability. They were locked on aspiration, on more, always more. By the time she was in her early 20s, Meghan had already developed a reputation among her peers. She was beautiful, charismatic, and incredibly strategic. Friends recall how she would linger just long enough at networking events to make the right connections, to get noticed by the people who mattered, and to position herself as more than just another struggling actress. She wasn't content to wait for fate to hand her success. She chased it. She demanded it. And Trevor Engelson was her first major win. Now, pause here for a moment. Ask yourself, have you ever seen someone who looks at relationships not as bonds of love, but as ladders? Ladders they climb to get to the next level? That's exactly what some people close to Meghan began to whisper. They saw her ambition. They admired it at times. But they also feared it, because ambition that burns too brightly doesn't stop until it consumes everything in its path. Trevor, by all accounts, was smitten. He fell for Meghan hard. He believed in her. He supported her budding acting career, even when it meant long hours, travel, and constant sacrifices. He wasn't just her partner. He was her cheerleader, her anchor, the one who believed she was destined for more. But here's the twist. Meghan seemed to believe that too. Not because of his support, but because of what his world offered her. Connections, invitations, a taste of the life she believed she deserved. And this is where the story begins to crack. Trevor was steady. Meghan was restless. Trevor wanted stability. Meghan wanted ascension. He was content with his Hollywood niche. She wanted to dominate Hollywood, or perhaps leapfrog past it entirely. This imbalance created a subtle but growing rift. One that Trevor couldn't see clearly at first, because when you're in love, you don't imagine the person you've built your life with sees you as a rung on a ladder instead of the destination. But Meghan's own behavior gave hints. Friends describe how she would talk endlessly about making it, about rubbing shoulders with people of influence, about wanting to belong to circles that seemed just out of reach. And here's where it gets even more telling. Titles fascinated her. Not just professional titles, not just director or executive. She was obsessed with aristocratic titles, social status, and positions of recognized power. She admired royals, she studied celebrities, and she placed herself, mentally, on the path to that life. Trevor, though, was merely Hollywood royalty. And that wasn't enough. Have you ever noticed how some people reveal their dreams through casual conversation? Meghan did exactly that. In blog posts from her now-defunct lifestyle site, The Tig, she romanticized stories of royalty and women who had climbed into power. She once wrote about her childhood fantasy of being a princess. But unlike other little girls who grow out of it, Meghan never really let go. She sharpened it. She matured it. She transformed it from a childish dream into an adult plan. And Trevor, well, Trevor was the opening act. Think about that. Imagine being married to someone who sees you as a prelude, not the story itself. Can you imagine the weight of that realization? Trevor may not have fully understood it then, but he would later. And when he did, the world of Meghan Markle unraveled before him in ways that would leave scars. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because before the unraveling came the facade. Meghan knew how to play her role. With Trevor, she could project the image of a devoted wife, the supportive partner, the woman in love. She smiled for the photos. She made the toasts. She attended the premieres. And Trevor? He believed it. Why wouldn't he? He was living the dream, a rising actress wife, a Hollywood career, and the promise of a future together. But beneath the surface, Meghan's hunger gnawed at her. She wanted more than what Trevor's world could ever offer. Here's the contradiction that makes this story so fascinating. Meghan wasn't untalented. She wasn't without charm. She wasn't without opportunity. But none of it seemed to satisfy her. Not the acting roles, not the Hollywood lifestyle, not even Trevor's unwavering support. Because what she truly wanted couldn't be found in scripts or studio lots. She wanted legacy. She wanted recognition. She wanted to be remembered not as that actress, but as something untouchable, unforgettable, undeniable. And so, the seeds of discontent grew. While Trevor basked in the comfort of their marriage, Meghan strategized. And this is where Trevor's later reflections sting the most. He believed he had married for love. She, as his actions would later suggest, may have married for position, for opportunity, for access. Now let me ask you, if you knew your partner saw you as a stepping stone, would you stay? Or would you run? Trevor, blinded by love, stayed. And Meghan, driven by ambition, prepared to leap. The introduction of Meghan Markle's story isn't about castles or crowns. It's about a woman who always wanted them, and a man who became the first victim of that dream. Trevor Engelson wasn't just her husband. He was her training ground, her proof that she could rise, reinvent, and outgrow. And in Hollywood, she proved she could. But here's where the story twists again. Because Meghan wasn't done climbing. Not by a long shot. And Trevor? He was about to learn just how replaceable he really was. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that Meghan Markle, before she ever shook the hand of a prince, before the world ever called her Duchess, was already rehearsing her role? That even in the early days, long before she was draped in Givenchy gowns or photographed on palace balconies, she was already consumed by a burning obsession, the hunger to ascend. Doesn't that already change the way you see her story? Because this isn't just about fairy tales. It's about the calculated steps of a woman who refused to remain ordinary. Chapter 1 begins not in Windsor, not in Buckingham, but in Los Angeles, the Hollywood Dream Factory. A place where stars are born, where millions arrive each year hoping to catch their big break, and where just as many vanish, forgotten, swallowed by the industry's ruthless churn. Meghan wasn't immune to the struggle. She wasn't handed roles on silver platters. She hustled. She auditioned. She fought for every second of screen time. But even then, those who knew her say she carried herself differently. She wasn't just another actress in line. She carried herself as if she were destined for more, as if Hollywood was just a stepping stone towards something grander. So let's ask the hard question. What exactly did Trevor Engelson see in Meghan? Why did a man like him, already carving his way into the entertainment world, fall so hard for a young actress struggling to find her footing? The answer lies in Meghan's most powerful weapon, her charm. Meghan had a way of making people feel seen, special, chosen. Trevor wasn't the first to be swept away by it, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. But unlike so many others, Trevor believed he was building a future with her. Picture the scene. Meghan, still relatively unknown, juggling bit parts and auditions, meets Trevor, a producer with industry credentials. He wasn't an A-lister, but he was someone. He had the connections, the credibility, the resources. For Meghan, who had long dreamt of more, it was an alignment too perfect to ignore. And Trevor? He was captivated. She was beautiful, ambitious, and, at least on the surface, madly in love with him. But here's where the contradictions begin to surface. For Trevor, Meghan was his partner. For Meghan, Trevor may have been something else entirely, a ticket, not necessarily to fame, but to proximity. Proximity to the rooms where decisions were made. Proximity to the people who mattered. Proximity to power. Friends who observed the couple describe how Meghan thrived in social settings. She wasn't shy. She wasn't content to linger on the sidelines. She wanted to be noticed. She wanted to be remembered. She worked rooms the way others worked scripts, studying, performing, adapting. Trevor's world gave her access to these rooms. To Meghan, that was invaluable. Think about this. How many relationships begin with genuine love but eventually reveal hidden motives? How often do we look back and realize that what we thought was fate was really strategy? Trevor, at the time, wouldn't have questioned it. Why would he? Meghan was supportive. She played the part of the devoted girlfriend and, later, wife. But there were cracks, subtle ones, that only years later would make sense. Meghan often spoke of her dreams in ways that seemed outsized compared to her circumstances. She didn't just want to be a successful actress. She wanted to be a star. She didn't just want recognition. She wanted legacy. She looked at Hollywood not as a destination, but as a launch pad. And Trevor? He was part of that launch pad. He provided stability, credibility, and connections. But was that enough for her? Or was he, from the very start, simply a rung on the ladder she was determined to climb? Here's a surprising fact that might make you pause. Meghan's fascination with royalty and titles wasn't something that appeared out of thin air once Harry entered the picture. Long before that, she had spoken openly about her admiration for royalty, her childhood fantasies of becoming a princess, and her fascination with power. On her blog, she often romanticized figures of influence, women who transformed their lives not just through talent, but through the men and circles they married into. These weren't just musings. For Meghan, they were guideposts. And Trevor? He fit into this larger puzzle without even realizing it. He was her entry point into a world where dreams were currency, where social climbing wasn't a flaw but a necessity. In Hollywood, everyone is trying to climb. Meghan was simply better at hiding how far she intended to go. But let's step into Trevor's shoes for a moment. Imagine being a man in love, working tirelessly in a brutal industry, believing you've found your partner. He took Meghan seriously. He invested in her, emotionally and financially. He believed in her career. He believed in their marriage. But beneath the surface, Meghan's ambitions pulsed like a drumbeat. She wanted more than Trevor's world could offer. And sooner or later, that hunger would tear them apart. Still, in those early days, it looked like a love story. The struggling actress and the producer. Red carpets, premieres, smiles for the cameras. Meghan played the part flawlessly. And Trevor, wrapped in the glow of it all, couldn't see the storm clouds forming. But there's something almost cruel about ambition unchecked. It blinds, it consumes, and it destroys anything or anyone that stands in its way. Meghan's story with Trevor is proof of that. Because while he thought he was building a life with her, she may have already been planning her escape. Ask yourself this. Can a marriage survive when one partner sees the other as a means rather than an end? History tells us no. Trevor and Meghan's story tells us no. And yet, in those glittering Hollywood days, before the world knew Meghan's name, before the tabloids crowned her a duchess, before Trevor became the ex, he was the man who believed, the man who supported, the man who would ultimately be discarded. But this is just the beginning. Because Meghan's obsession didn't stop at Trevor. Hollywood wasn't enough. Fame wasn't enough. She wanted more. And as we'll soon see, she had already set her sights on the ultimate prize, a royal title. And that's where Chapter 2 begins. Because what Meghan did next with Trevor would shock him, and it would foreshadow every ruthless decision that followed. She didn't just leave him. She erased him. And that's when the world finally began to glimpse the real Meghan Markle. What does it feel like to wake up one morning and realize the person you thought was your forever has already written you out of their story? That's the question Trevor Engelson must have asked himself when his marriage to Meghan Markle collapsed like a house of cards. Because here's the chilling truth. It didn't end with a fiery confrontation. It didn't end with a dramatic showdown. No, Meghan ended her marriage with a cold, calculated efficiency that stunned not just Trevor, but everyone who knew them. Chapter 2 is the unraveling of a marriage built on unequal terms. At first glance, their union seemed picture-perfect. Hollywood producer and rising actress, young and ambitious, poised to conquer their worlds together. But peel back the glossy photographs, the smiles on red carpets, and the stories whispered among friends, and you begin to see the cracks. Trevor wanted stability. Meghan wanted ascension. He believed in building a life side by side. She believed in building an empire, and if that meant leaving someone behind, so be it. Let's paint the scene. Meghan was away in Toronto, filming Suits. Trevor remained in Los Angeles, managing his projects. Distance in relationships isn't uncommon, especially in Hollywood. But for Meghan, the separation wasn't just physical. It was emotional. She began to drift, to detach, to create space not only between herself and Trevor, but between the life they had built together. For Trevor, it was confusing. For Meghan, it was liberation. The breaking point came not in a heated argument, but in an envelope. Yes, an envelope. Meghan reportedly ended her marriage by sending back her wedding ring by mail. Think about that for a moment. No face-to-face discussion. No attempt to repair. No acknowledgement of the years spent together. Just a ring in the mail. Cold. Detached. Final. Trevor was blindsided. Friends said he was devastated, shocked, and utterly humiliated. Imagine believing you're working through the usual struggles of a marriage, only to discover your partner has already checked out and decided you're no longer useful to their story. Now ask yourself, what kind of person ends a marriage like that? Is it the act of someone brokenhearted, or the act of someone who had already moved on emotionally, who saw the relationship as transactional, as complete? Meghan's decision to end things so abruptly hinted at a truth Trevor would later reflect on. Maybe he had never been her destination. Maybe he had always been a step. And this is where we need to talk about control. Meghan was a woman who wanted control over her image, her trajectory, her destiny. Ending her marriage on her terms, in a way that left Trevor no space for dialogue, gave her exactly that, control. It was her decision, her timing, her narrative. She didn't want the messy back and forth of emotions. She wanted closure on her terms, and she took it. But here's the contradiction that makes this story so haunting. Meghan was vocal about female empowerment, about being seen and heard. Yet when it came to Trevor, she silenced him. She erased him not just from her personal life, but from her public life. After their divorce, Meghan spoke little of Trevor. She didn't acknowledge the years he supported her. She didn't give him credit for the foundation he helped her build. It was as if he had never existed. Trevor, meanwhile, struggled. Friends described him as blindsided, heartbroken, and even humiliated. This wasn't just about losing a wife. It was about realizing he had been disposable. Imagine how that must have felt. To love someone so deeply, to give so much, and to discover you were simply a chapter she had finished reading. That realization crushed him. And here's the part that should make you lean forward. Meghan's method of ending her marriage foreshadowed her future decisions with the royal family. Cold. Final. Erasing. With Trevor, it was a ring in the mail. With the royals, it was Megxit, an announcement delivered to the world before the family had even been fully informed. The pattern is undeniable. When Meghan decides she's done, and she doesn't look back. But let's go deeper. Was Meghan's exit from Trevor's life truly about unhappiness? Or was it about opportunity? By the time she divorced Trevor, Meghan's career was gaining traction. She was no longer just another actress. She was Rachel Zane on Suits, a character that gave her recognition, a steady paycheck, and visibility. She was mingling with higher-profile figures. She was being invited to better events. She was beginning to taste the kind of life she had always craved. Did Trevor still fit into that vision? Or had he become a symbol of the past she was desperate to shed? There's a cruel irony here. Trevor had supported her when she was struggling, but once she no longer needed that support, she cut him loose. Isn't it ironic how often people stay when you're down, but disappear once you rise? Meghan flipped the script. She stayed while she needed him and disappeared once she no longer did. But perhaps the most telling detail is the speed of her erasure. Meghan didn't just end her marriage. She scrubbed Trevor from her story. She rarely, if ever, spoke his name publicly. She reinvented herself as if he had never existed. And this is where Trevor's silence becomes deafening. He didn't lash out. He didn't smear her. He didn't fight for attention. He retreated, quiet, dignified. But inside, he was broken. Imagine that heartbreak. Imagine watching your former partner ascend to levels of fame and power you could never give her, all while being treated as if you never mattered. That pain doesn't fade easily. Trevor carried it. And years later, when Meghan's behavior with Harry began to mirror what she had done to him, Trevor's friends couldn't help but say, "We saw this coming." But for Trevor, the divorce wasn't just an ending. It was a revelation. He finally understood the imbalance of their marriage. He had given love. She had taken opportunity. He had sought permanence. She had sought progression. And once she had climbed as high as he could take her, she leapt. And here's the haunting cliffhanger. If Trevor was just the first to be discarded once he had served his purpose, what did that mean for Harry? Was history destined to repeat itself? Was Meghan's obsession with titles and status so deep that no relationship, no matter how sacred, was safe from being sacrificed? Because as Trevor would learn, and as Harry would eventually discover, Meghan's hunger wasn't just for love. It was for legacy. And when love and legacy collide, only one survives. And what Meghan did next proved it beyond doubt. What if the person you loved most wasn't really loving you back, but rather loving what you could give them? That haunting possibility hung over Trevor Engelson long after Meghan Markle had vanished from his life. And here, in Chapter 3, we peel back the curtain on Meghan's relentless social climbing, her tactics, her strategy, and the unsettling pattern that Trevor would only recognize too late. Because what if love, in Meghan's story, was never the final destination? What if love was merely a vehicle for something else, status? This is where Meghan's obsession truly takes center stage. To understand it, you have to understand Hollywood. It's not just an industry. It's a battlefield. A place where connections mean more than raw talent. Where who you know can elevate you far higher, far faster, than what you can do. Meghan understood this better than most. She knew that talent could get you in the door, but status would keep you there. And status, for Meghan, became the prize. Friends from her early acting days recall how Meghan was never content to mingle with just anyone. At parties, she gravitated toward the most important person in the room. She had an instinct for influence. She could identify the producers, the executives, the people who held power. And once she found them, she knew exactly how to make herself memorable. She laughed a little louder, leaned in a little closer, asked the right questions, gave the right compliments. Meghan wasn't just socializing. She was working the room like it was a chessboard, and she was determined to be queen. Trevor noticed this. How could he not? At first, he may have admired it. After all, he was in Hollywood too. Networking was part of survival. But where Trevor saw relationships as organic, Meghan saw them as strategic. For her, every dinner, every event, every introduction was a potential step higher. And Trevor, whether he realized it or not, was the access card that opened the first doors. Now let's pause and ask a question. Is ambition a bad thing? On its own, no. Ambition drives people to achieve greatness. But what happens when ambition is untethered from loyalty, empathy, or gratitude? What happens when ambition becomes an obsession? That's the darker side we begin to see in Meghan's story. As Meghan's career on Suits began to take off, her confidence grew. So did her selectiveness. She no longer wanted to be seen with just anyone. She wanted to be seen with the right ones. The elite, the powerful, the wealthy. She began to distance herself from old friends who didn't serve her new image. People who once considered themselves close to Meghan described a sudden coldness, a wall that seemed to rise between them and her. Unless you could offer her something, status, connections, influence, you found yourself slowly pushed aside. And here's where Trevor started to feel the shift. In Hollywood, Trevor had credibility, but he wasn't an A-lister. He wasn't a household name. Meghan was beginning to crave something bigger than what Trevor's circle could offer. His success wasn't enough. His network wasn't enough. She wanted to break into the highest tiers of society, the circles where celebrities mixed with politicians, where wealth was inherited, not earned. To Meghan, those circles represented permanence. And permanence was what she craved more than anything. It's ironic, isn't it? Trevor gave Meghan stability when she was struggling. He stood by her side during her climb. But once she reached a higher rung, she began to see him as insufficient for the life she envisioned. It wasn't that Trevor had failed. It was that Meghan's ambitions had grown beyond him. And let's not forget Meghan's fascination with titles. She wasn't shy about it. Even before Harry, even before Kensington Palace, Meghan spoke openly about her admiration for royalty. Friends remembered her expressing dreams of marrying into wealth, into power, into something greater than Hollywood fame. For Meghan, Hollywood stardom wasn't the pinnacle. Royalty was. Aristocracy was. Titles weren't just symbols, they were her ultimate obsession. Trevor, meanwhile, wanted something far simpler: love, family, stability. He wasn't chasing crowns. He wasn't chasing thrones. He wasn't chasing legacy. But Meghan? She was chasing all of it, and more. Their goals diverged in ways that made their marriage unsustainable. And here's the cruelest part. Meghan didn't fight for Trevor to come along with her. She left him behind without hesitation. And yet, she didn't stop climbing. In fact, her split from Trevor freed her. She could now fully dedicate herself to chasing the life she had always imagined, without the burden of a partner whose ambitions didn't align with hers. From Toronto to London, Meghan expanded her circle. She inserted herself into elite gatherings, charity galas, and events where aristocrats and billionaires mingled. Always smiling, always polished, always unforgettable. But here's the question that should make you lean in. Was Meghan ever truly in love with Trevor? Or was she in love with what Trevor represented? A doorway, an introduction, a stepping stone? The evidence suggests the latter. Because if Trevor had been her true destination, would she have discarded him so quickly? Would she have ended their marriage with a ring in the mail? Would she have erased him from her life as though he had never existed? And Trevor? He was left with the bitter realization that what he thought was love might have been something else entirely. He had believed he was Meghan's partner. But in reality, he may have been her practice run, her rehearsal for the bigger role she was preparing for. Because when Meghan finally met Prince Harry, all the pieces of her lifelong plan snapped into place. But before Harry, before the palace, before the Netflix deals and the royal drama, there was Trevor, the man who believed in her, the man who supported her, the man who discovered too late that he was just a chapter in her climb. Meghan's social climbing tactics didn't begin with Harry. They began here, with Trevor, with Hollywood, with the relentless pursuit of status that defined every choice she made. And yet, the most shocking part of this chapter isn't the way Meghan used connections. It's what Trevor would later confess about the breaking point. The moment he realized that his wife wasn't really his wife at all, but a woman already planning her exit. Because what Meghan did next wasn't just cruel. It was chilling. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the person you thought was your partner for life suddenly reveals that you were never really a partner at all, but a placeholder? That's the reality Trevor Engelson faced when Meghan Markle finally showed her hand. Chapter 4 is where the mask begins to slip, where Trevor's confessions reveal the true breaking point. And once you hear what he realized about Meghan, you'll understand why their marriage never stood a chance. Trevor Engelson wasn't a naive man. He wasn't some wide-eyed dreamer. He was a Hollywood producer who had seen plenty of ambition, plenty of egos, plenty of people trying to claw their way to the top. But with Meghan, he thought it was different. He thought it was love. For years, he believed their bond was genuine, that their shared journey through Hollywood's brutal world had forged something unbreakable. And in the beginning, maybe it had. But slowly, piece by piece, he began to see signs that Meghan was changing. Or perhaps, more accurately, that the Meghan he fell in love with had never truly been there at all. Let's talk about those signs. Friends close to Trevor recall that he often seemed puzzled by Meghan's shifting behavior. She became more detached, more calculating, more focused on her image than on their marriage. He tried to rationalize it. After all, she was working on Suits, her career was blossoming. Maybe the distance was just the price of success. But the truth gnawed at him. Something was off. Something didn't add up. And then came the infamous moment that still shocks people to this day. Meghan didn't sit down with Trevor to discuss their problems. She didn't fight for the marriage, didn't seek counseling, didn't even extend the courtesy of closure. Instead, she ended things in a way that left Trevor reeling. She mailed him her wedding ring. No conversation, no explanation, just a ring in the mail. Imagine that. Imagine devoting years of your life to someone, only to have them reduce the end of your marriage to a postal delivery. It was cold, it was impersonal, and it was devastating. When Trevor later opened up about this, the pain was still evident. He couldn't comprehend how someone he had loved so deeply could discard him with such indifference. Friends say he was blindsided, humiliated, left questioning everything he thought he knew about Meghan. Had she ever truly loved him? Or had he been nothing more than a step along her carefully calculated path? But here's where the story gets even darker. Meghan didn't just walk away. She erased him. In the months following their split, Meghan made a deliberate effort to scrub Trevor from her narrative. Publicly, she acted as though he had never existed. Privately, she moved on with astonishing speed, reshaping her life, her image, her brand. Trevor, meanwhile, was left in the dust, heartbroken, discarded, silenced. And here's the chilling part. Trevor wasn't the only one who noticed the coldness. Meghan's friends, even those who had admired her ambition, were taken aback by how ruthlessly she ended the marriage. Some described it as heartless. Others saw it as proof of her single-minded obsession with climbing higher, no matter who got hurt in the process. For Meghan, there was no room for sentimentality. There was only the next step, the next opportunity, the next rung on the ladder. Trevor, looking back, began to connect the dots. He realized that Meghan's charm, her charisma, her affection, it was all part of a performance. Not necessarily malicious, but calculated. She knew what to say, how to say it, how to make people feel special. And Trevor, like so many others, had fallen for it. He had believed in the role she played, without seeing the actress behind it. That realization broke him. Now, let me ask you, have you ever had someone in your life who seemed too perfect, too polished, too good to be true? Someone who knew exactly what to say, exactly how to act, exactly how to win you over. And later, when the mask slipped, you realized you never really knew them at all. That's the devastation Trevor faced. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the shattering of an illusion. And yet, in his heartbreak, Trevor also found clarity. He began to see Meghan's pattern. Her ambition wasn't a flaw. It was her defining feature. She wasn't content with comfort. She wasn't satisfied with love alone. She wanted power. She wanted recognition. She wanted titles. And Trevor, though successful in his own right, could never give her what she truly craved. Once he understood that, everything made sense. The coldness, the detachment, the ring in the mail. It wasn't about him. It was about her. And here's the most haunting confession of all. Trevor admitted to close friends that he had always felt, deep down, that Meghan saw herself as destined for something greater. He thought he could be part of that destiny. But in the end, he was just a stepping stone. A temporary chapter in a much larger story. And when that chapter ended, Meghan closed the book without a second thought. It's hard not to feel sympathy for Trevor here. He wasn't a bad husband. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't neglectful. By all accounts, he supported Meghan, believed in her, stood by her side. And yet, none of it was enough. Because Meghan didn't want a partner. She wanted a platform. And this is where the story takes a turn that should send chills down your spine. Because Trevor's breaking point wasn't just the end of his marriage. It was a glimpse into Meghan's future. The way she treated him foreshadowed the way she would later treat the royal family. The same cold detachment. The same ruthless erasure. The same obsession with controlling the narrative. With Trevor, it was a ring in the mail. With the royals, it was a global announcement of Megxit before the family was even fully informed. Different players. Same playbook. And yet, Trevor's pain didn't end with the divorce. For years, he carried the scars. He stayed silent publicly, but those close to him knew the truth. He had been used. He had been discarded. And he had been replaced by something far grander than he could ever offer, a prince. But Trevor's confessions don't just tell us about his heartbreak. They tell us about Meghan's strategy, about the way she viewed relationships, about the way she pursued her obsession with status and titles, no matter the cost. And if Trevor's story teaches us anything, it's this. Meghan Markle doesn't just leave people behind. She erases them. And that erasure was only the beginning. Because what Meghan did after Trevor wasn't just a reinvention. It was a masterclass in social climbing. She turned heartbreak into opportunity, divorce into freedom, and obscurity into destiny. But what came next would shock even Trevor. Because when Meghan unveiled her true playbook, it became clear that her marriage to Trevor had been nothing more than practice. Practice for the biggest role of her life. The royal wife. And that's where Chapter 5 begins. Because Meghan's calculated transformation into the world's most strategic social climber will make you question whether anything about her fairy tale was ever real. What if the life you thought was authentic, the smiles, the romance, the carefully worded interviews, was actually scripted all along? What if every move, every relationship, every public moment had been part of a playbook? That's exactly what Trevor Engelson began to realize after Meghan Markle was no longer his wife. Chapter 5 is where we lay bare the Meghan Markle playbook, the step-by-step guide she seemed to follow to transform herself from a struggling actress into a woman positioned for global influence. And make no mistake, it didn't happen by chance. Let's begin with Meghan's image. While still with Trevor, Meghan started curating herself like a brand. She wasn't just a working actress. She was a lifestyle figure, a tastemaker. Her blog, The Tig, became the foundation of this reinvention. On its surface, it was a cheerful lifestyle site, full of recipes, travel tips, and interviews with influencers. But look deeper, and it was more than that. It was a projection of who Meghan wanted the world to see. Cultured, worldly, sophisticated, connected. Every post was a brushstroke in the painting of Meghan Markle, modern icon. And here's where the playbook becomes clear. Meghan didn't just write about food or travel. She wrote about power. She highlighted women who had married into influence, who had ascended through relationships, who had transformed themselves into global figures. These weren't coincidences. These were case studies. Meghan wasn't just admiring these women. She was learning from them. Trevor, meanwhile, remained grounded. He was focused on his work as a producer, dealing with the gritty, unglamorous reality of Hollywood. Meghan? She was focused on narrative, on perception, on carefully crafting the story she wanted the public to believe. This imbalance between them grew wider by the day. Let's pause for a moment. Ask yourself, have you ever met someone who seems to live two lives? The life they show the world, and the life that exists behind closed doors? That was Meghan. To Trevor and their close friends, she could be warm, ambitious, sometimes restless. To the public, through her blog and interviews, she was already the polished duchess in waiting long before Harry entered the picture. She wasn't documenting her life. She was rehearsing her role. And then came the next tactic in her playbook, strategic philanthropy. Meghan began aligning herself with causes and organizations that positioned her as a humanitarian. She wasn't just an actress. She was someone who cared about the world, about change, about justice. Admirable on the surface. But critics would later argue these appearances weren't entirely selfless. They were steps. Each charity event, each publicized visit, added credibility to the image she was crafting. She wasn't just chasing fame. She was chasing gravitas. Trevor noticed the shift. He'd once been Meghan's anchor, the person who grounded her during the highs and lows. But now, she didn't want grounding. She wanted ascension. And Trevor, though successful in his lane, wasn't the ladder she needed anymore. He couldn't take her to the circles she now coveted, the aristocracy, the royalty, the untouchable elites. This is where the playbook takes its sharpest turn. Meghan's focus on titles became unmistakable. Friends recalled conversations where she expressed fascination with royalty. She consumed stories of modern fairy tales, commoners marrying into crowns. She once admitted to friends that she dreamed of being a princess, not in the childlike way most little girls do, but in a way that sounded almost like a plan. A goal. Think about that. While Trevor believed they were building a life together, Meghan may have already been preparing for a bigger stage. Their marriage wasn't the climax. It was Act 1, a rehearsal, and Trevor, unknowingly, was just one of the props. But what makes the playbook so chilling isn't that Meghan had ambition. Plenty of ambitious women rise without scandal. It's the way she seemed to discard anyone who no longer fit her strategy. Old friends, left behind. Trevor, erased. Family members who couldn't be polished into her narrative, cut off. Each step of her climb left someone discarded in its wake. And yet, it worked. Look at the trajectory. Meghan went from a struggling actress on the fringes of Hollywood to a recognized star on Suits. From there, she transformed herself into a lifestyle influencer with a blog that drew celebrity attention. Then came philanthropy, aligning her image with humanitarian causes. Then, like a final act, came Harry, the prince, the crown, the ultimate title. The Meghan Markle playbook had delivered. But here's the twist that makes this story unforgettable. Trevor, looking back, realized that every tactic she used with Harry had been foreshadowed in their marriage. The charm, the curation, the ambition disguised as altruism, the obsession with image, the willingness to walk away without a glance back. Harry wasn't Meghan's first performance. He was her encore. And this brings us to the cliffhanger. Because Trevor's revelations about the playbook don't just explain how Meghan rose. They raise a darker question. If every move was calculated, if every relationship was a strategy, then what did that make her marriage to Harry? A love story? Or the final, most brilliant act in a performance Meghan had been perfecting her entire life? And what Meghan revealed in her next chapter makes the answer even more chilling. Because Chapter 6 is where we dive into Meghan's obsession with titles, an obsession so deep that even her own children became pawns in the game. What if I told you that Meghan Markle's fixation wasn't simply about fame, money, or even love, but about titles? Not titles in the sense of actress, philanthropist, or influencer, but titles that carried centuries of weight. Duchess, princess, queen. This was no passing fascination. This was an obsession that began long before she ever met Prince Harry. Chapter 6 is where we uncovered just how deep that obsession ran, and how Trevor Engelson, watching from the sidelines after their divorce, realized that he had never truly been the endgame. Let's begin with Meghan's childhood. Like many young girls, Meghan grew up fascinated by fairy tales. But unlike most, she didn't simply outgrow them. Friends from her early years recalled that Meghan often spoke of castles, crowns, and the allure of princesses. She wasn't shy about it. She admitted in interviews and blog posts that she once dreamed of being a princess, not as a childish fantasy, but as a dream that lingered into adulthood. The difference is that while most girls leave the fantasy behind, Meghan studied it. She treated it like a roadmap. Now, let's connect the dots. Even while married to Trevor Engelson, Meghan's interest in aristocracy never faded. She immersed herself in stories of women who had elevated their lives through marriage into royalty or wealth. Think of Grace Kelly, the Hollywood actress who became Princess of Monaco. Meghan idolized her. She wrote about her. She saw in Kelly's life a blueprint, a woman who went from actress to royal icon in a single move. For Meghan, this wasn't just inspiration. It was instruction. Trevor, of course, couldn't compete with that. He was a Hollywood producer, successful in his own way, but he didn't carry a title. He didn't come with centuries of legacy behind his name. He couldn't make Meghan a duchess. And deep down, Meghan wanted more than success. She wanted status. The kind of status no Hollywood producer could give. Ask yourself this. What's the difference between wealth and royalty? Plenty of Hollywood stars have money, fame, even influence. But royalty offers something unique: untouchability, permanence, titles that don't fade when the box office dips or the TV ratings slide. Meghan understood this difference. She didn't just want recognition in her lifetime. She wanted to etch herself into history. And her fascination with titles didn't stop at herself. Once Harry was in the picture, Meghan's obsession extended to her children. From the very beginning, Meghan made it clear she wanted Archie and Lilibet to have royal titles. This wasn't just about security, though she often framed it that way. It was about legacy, about ensuring her children, and by extension herself, were permanently cemented into the royal structure. Even after stepping back from royal duties, she continued to push for those titles. Why? Because the titles weren't about service. They were about status. Trevor's hindsight is chilling here. He once believed Meghan's drive was about career success. But after seeing her pursuit of royal titles, he realized that her obsession had always been about labels, about recognition that money alone couldn't buy. It explained everything. The cold ending to their marriage, the way she erased him from her story, the way she recalibrated her image again and again until she was ready for her final act. With Trevor, she rehearsed. With Harry, she executed. But let's not sugarcoat this. Meghan's obsession with titles caused fractures everywhere she went. With Trevor, it destroyed their marriage. With the royal family, it fueled some of the most explosive conflicts in recent memory. She clashed with palace traditions. She challenged royal hierarchy. She demanded recognition that the institution wasn't ready to give. And in doing so, she created one of the most divisive legacies in modern royal history. Here's where the contradiction bites hardest. Meghan often spoke of wanting to modernize royalty, to step away from archaic traditions. And yet, at the very same time, she was obsessed with holding on to those traditions when they served her. She wanted to be free from the royal machine, but she also wanted the titles that machine controlled. She rejected the system publicly, while privately fighting to keep its labels. And this is where Trevor's story and Harry's story intertwine. Both men gave Meghan what she needed in the moment. Trevor gave her Hollywood access. Harry gave her royal access. But in both cases, once Meghan had what she wanted, the cracks began to show. Trevor was discarded. Harry was pulled into conflict with his own family. The common thread? Titles, status, recognition. Now, let's zoom in on the psychological side of this. Why would someone cling so tightly to titles? Because titles offer validation that nothing else can. For Meghan, who had spent years fighting to be seen in Hollywood, who had felt overlooked and undervalued, titles were the ultimate affirmation. They weren't just symbols of power. They were proof that she had risen above the ordinary. But here's the haunting question: at what cost? Trevor lost his marriage. Harry lost his family ties. The monarchy itself faced turbulence it hadn't seen in decades. All because of one woman's obsession with being recognized not just as Meghan Markle, but as Her Royal Highness. And this leads us to the cliffhanger. Because if Meghan's hunger for titles could dissolve her marriage to Trevor and fuel her battles with the royal family, what happens when those titles no longer protect her? What happens when the very system she clung to decides it's had enough? Because what Meghan did when she finally met Harry wasn't just about love. It was about securing the ultimate title she had always craved. And in Chapter 7, we see exactly how she positioned herself to do it, by making Prince Harry the perfect target. What if the greatest love story of the century wasn't really a love story at all, but the ultimate strategic move in a lifelong plan? That's the chilling question at the heart of Chapter 7. Because when Meghan Markle met Prince Harry, the world swooned at the fairy tale, a Hollywood actress and a British prince, falling head over heels across continents. But what if it wasn't fate? What if it was design? This is where Trevor Engelson's hindsight becomes a haunting echo. He once thought he was Meghan's endgame. He thought their love was real. But as he watched Meghan step seamlessly into Harry's life, into Kensington Palace, into the headlines, he couldn't ignore the eerie familiarity. The charm, the performance, the calculated ascent. Harry wasn't just a partner. He was the ultimate target. Let's begin with the infamous blind date. Officially, Harry and Meghan were set up by a mutual friend. The story is neat, romantic, almost cinematic. But here's the contradiction. Meghan was no stranger to Harry before that meeting. She had admitted years earlier to being fascinated by the royal family. She followed their lives. She blogged about royal weddings. Friends even recalled her speaking about Harry specifically, long before they were introduced. So was it really fate? Or was it an opportunity Meghan had been waiting for? Trevor's experience makes this question all the more pressing. He remembered how Meghan had always gravitated toward the most influential person in the room, how she could make them feel like the center of the universe. That same technique was now being deployed on Harry. And it worked. Harry, still reeling from years of public scrutiny, from the trauma of losing his mother, from a lifetime of pressure, was vulnerable. Meghan knew exactly how to present herself as the woman who could rescue him from it all. Think about it. Meghan's background as an actress gave her the tools to play any role. With Trevor, she was the supportive wife. With Hollywood elites, she was the ambitious networker. With Harry, she became the empathetic outsider, the woman who understood him like no one else. She told him what he needed to hear. She offered him escape. She offered him freedom. Was it love? Perhaps. But was it also strategy? Absolutely. Harry was smitten almost instantly. He spoke of how quickly he knew Meghan was the one. He described their connection as magical, fated. But friends close to Meghan noticed her language was different. She often spoke in terms of opportunity, of destiny, of stepping into a role bigger than herself. It wasn't just about Harry as a man. It was about what Harry represented, a ticket into the monarchy, into history, into the titles she had always craved. Now, let's pause and ask the uncomfortable question. Was Meghan in love with Harry the man, or Harry the prince? The answer may be both, but one certainly outweighed the other. Because time and again, Meghan's actions revealed a fixation not on Harry's personhood, but on his position. She wasn't content to be Harry's girlfriend. She needed to be his wife, his duchess, the mother of his royal children. She needed the titles, the permanence, the status. Trevor, watching from afar, couldn't help but see the parallels. He had once been Meghan's golden ticket, to Hollywood, to influence, to higher circles. But when his usefulness ran out, she discarded him. Now, Harry had become the golden ticket to something even greater. Would his fate be any different? Or was he simply the next stepping stone? And let's not forget the timing. Meghan's career was plateauing. Suits had given her recognition, but she wasn't breaking into A-list Hollywood. Her blog, The Tig, had a following, but it wasn't making her a global name. She was stuck in the limbo of moderate success. But then came Harry, an opportunity so perfect it almost seemed scripted. Within months, Meghan transformed from a cable actress into one of the most talked-about women in the world. That leap doesn't happen by accident. Here's another chilling detail. When Meghan first visited Harry at Kensington Palace, she reportedly took photos of herself inside. For most women, that might be excitement, a way to capture a magical moment. But for Meghan, critics argue it was more proof, evidence of her arrival, a trophy in her long pursuit of titles. And Harry, blinded by love, didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. For a man who had long felt overshadowed, misunderstood, and defined by his brother William, Meghan's adoration must have felt like salvation. She told him he was enough. She told him he could break free. She told him he didn't need the monarchy to define him. And he believed her. But Trevor's story loomed like a ghost. He had once believed too. He had once been the center of Meghan's universe. And when she no longer needed him, she left without a trace. The question became, would Harry suffer the same fate? Because make no mistake, Meghan's pursuit of Harry wasn't just about love. It was about power. It was about securing the ultimate title she had dreamt of since childhood, Duchess. And once she had it, once she stood beside Harry on that palace balcony, once the cameras flashed and the headlines screamed modern fairy tale, the Meghan Markle playbook was complete. Or was it? Because what happened next proved that marrying Harry wasn't the end of her story, it was only the beginning. The palace walls, the royal protocols, the centuries-old traditions Meghan claimed she admired, soon became the very things she despised. And as Trevor knew all too well, when Meghan despises something, she doesn't compromise. She leaves. And that's where Chapter 8 begins. Because Meghan's transition from Hollywood to Kensington wasn't just a dream come true. It was the start of a battle that would shake the monarchy to its core. What if stepping into Kensington Palace wasn't the fairy tale Meghan Markle had always imagined, but instead the opening act of a brand new performance? That's exactly what Chapter 8 is about. Her transformation from a Hollywood actress into a duchess, and the contradictions that came with it. Because while the world saw a Cinderella story unfolding, those who had known Meghan before, Trevor Engelson most of all, recognized the same pattern repeating itself. Let's rewind to that moment the cameras first captured Meghan walking alongside Harry, now officially welcomed into the royal fold. For millions of people, it was enchanting. The actress from Suits had not only landed a prince, but she was being embraced by one of the oldest and most powerful families on earth. She wore the clothes. She smiled at the cameras. She seemed to radiate the grace and charm of a woman who had finally found her true destiny. But beneath the surface, something much more complicated was happening. Meghan had spent years in Hollywood learning how to craft her image. Every red carpet, every blog post on the Tig, every photo curated for Instagram. It was training. And now she had the biggest stage in the world, the British monarchy. Suddenly, every gesture, every outfit, every word mattered. And Meghan wasn't about to waste the opportunity. She played the role to perfection. But Trevor, watching from afar, must have felt the sting of recognition. He had seen this before. He had lived it. The glow, the charm, the smile. It was the same routine Meghan had used with him, only now the stakes were far higher. Here's the irony. For years, Meghan had idolized the idea of royalty, the glamour, the prestige, the power. But once inside, she found that reality clashed with fantasy. The palace wasn't Hollywood. It wasn't a place where she could reinvent herself freely, where she could dictate the narrative. The monarchy was bound by centuries of rules, traditions, and rigid hierarchy. Meghan had always been the director of her own story, but now, she was expected to follow a script written long before she was born. And Meghan Markle does not follow scripts she didn't write herself. Think about the contrast. Trevor was a Hollywood producer, someone with influence, but not legacy. Harry was a prince. His very existence came with titles and status Meghan had always craved. But with that came something Meghan hadn't bargained for: limitations. In Hollywood, She could maneuver her image at will. In the palace, she was suddenly second to William and Kate, constantly measured against traditions she found archaic. For someone obsessed with status, being told to stay second place must have been intolerable. Here's a surprising twist. Insiders revealed that Meghan struggled almost immediately with the reality of royal life. The curtsies, the protocols, the endless rules about clothing, speech, and behavior, they suffocated her. The very system she had long admired now felt like a cage. Trevor, had he been watching closely, would have seen the same restless energy that once pulled her away from him now taking shape again. With him, she outgrew Hollywood comfort. With Harry, she was already beginning to outgrow palace conformity. And this is where Trevor's ghost haunts the story. He had once believed Meghan was in it for the long haul, only to discover she was always looking ahead to the next opportunity. Was Harry simply another step in that trajectory? The signs pointed that way. Meghan had achieved her dream title, Duchess of Sussex. But titles alone weren't enough. She wanted influence. She wanted to modernize, to lead, to dominate headlines. And when the institution resisted her, the cracks began to show. Let's pause and ask the question that keeps surfacing. Does Meghan fall in love with men, or does she fall in love with the opportunities they represent? With Trevor, she gained access to Hollywood. With Harry, she gained access to the monarchy. But what happens when those opportunities run their course? When Trevor could no longer elevate her, she left. When the monarchy resisted her, she rebelled. The pattern is undeniable. And here's where it gets darker. Meghan wasn't content to simply be Harry's wife. She wanted her own platform, her own stage. The palace wanted her to play a supporting role, but Meghan wanted to be the star. This ambition, which had once driven her in Hollywood, now clashed head-on with royal tradition. For Meghan, compromise was never an option. She had spent her entire life chasing crowns. She wasn't about to let anyone tell her to sit quietly in the background. Harry, meanwhile, was enraptured. He believed he had found his soulmate, the woman who understood him, who offered him escape from a life he often described as suffocating. Meghan told him what he wanted to hear, that he didn't need the monarchy, that he could build a new life, that love could outweigh duty. Trevor had once believed similar promises, only to discover they were fleeting. Would Harry face the same fate? Trevor's friends, watching from Hollywood, began whispering. They saw the patterns. Meghan's rise through Harry mirrored her rise through Trevor. Only now, the consequences were global. And Trevor, who had once been humiliated by a ring in the mail, must have wondered if Harry too would one day find himself discarded, blindsided by the same ruthless ambition. And here's the cliffhanger that takes us into the next chapter. Meghan had achieved the unthinkable. She had transformed from a Hollywood actress into a duchess. But even that wasn't enough. Because soon, Meghan's hunger for recognition would ignite a conflict inside the palace walls, one so explosive it would shake the monarchy itself. And that's where Chapter 9 begins. Because Meghan's royal rift didn't just prove Trevor right. It exposed her obsession with titles in a way the world could no longer ignore. What if the fairy tale wedding that captivated the world was never the happy ending, but the spark that lit a royal war? That's where Chapter 9 takes us. The rift that Meghan Markle's obsession with recognition and status created inside the palace walls. Because once she had the crown-adjacent title she always craved, it still wasn't enough. And Trevor Engelson's ghost lingered over this story, a reminder of how Meghan's hunger had destroyed their marriage and now threatened to tear apart the monarchy itself. The world remembers that glittering day in May 2018. St. George's Chapel. The flowers, the music, the celebrities in the pews. Meghan walking down the aisle in a gown that symbolized simplicity yet screamed elegance. To millions watching, it was a dream realized. But for Meghan, was it the destination? Or was it the beginning of the next climb? Because soon after the wedding, tension began to build. Meghan was no longer just an actress married to a prince. She was a duchess, part of an institution bound by centuries of hierarchy. And within that hierarchy, she wasn't at the top. She wasn't equal to Kate Middleton, the future queen. She wasn't above William and Kate's children in the line of succession. She wasn't the star of the show. For someone who had worked her whole life to be noticed, to stand out, to be at the center of every room, this must have felt unbearable.